So in today's video, talking about the most disappointing albums of 2022. These are albums that I went into with some kind of anticipation, pretty much mostly bands that I've known in the past. But they released albums that didn't really meet my standards, or things I didn't really enjoy as much as I thought I would. So these are all well-established bands. I don't really find it appropriate to try to talk negatively about more unsigned or up-and-coming bands. I usually just say positive things about those. But these are bands that in the past they have created a really good album, but these recent releases just didn't do it for me. So let me just get right into a numbered list, but it's not ranked, so I'm just kind of going in order of release. My first one is Papa Roach with Ego Trip. And this one, it didn't really do much for me. I mean, some of the singles were okay. It was 14 songs. I think all the songs were 3 minutes each. The album just wasn't really great. I think it's one of those genres that doesn't age very well. I think it's, if this band, if they want to move on, they're probably going to have to evolve their sound. In the 2000s, they released an album in the Fest, and that was a really good album. I mean, Papa Roach, probably their first 3 or 4 albums were really good, but this one just didn't do it for me. The next album I have is Fozzy with Boombox. So this is a band started by Chris Jericho. He's a wrestler, and they started as a cover band, but then they started making their own material. It's okay. I mean, there wasn't really anything that stood out for me. So for that reason, I have it on this list. I think on this list he tries to emulate Ozzy Osbourne a couple times. But I don't think any of the songs really stood out. It's more new metal. It's kind of butt rock, but it just didn't really do it for me. So that's why I have that on my list. Now, my number 3 is Def Leppard's Diamond Star Halos. Now, Def Leppard, I kind of set the bar really high for Def Leppard because they were one of the bands that got me into music, and just heavy music and metal in general, because back in 1988, I used to listen to that album Hysteria all the time. And Def Leppard, they're a legacy band. They've released great albums. They released a few singles prior to this album, and I thought they were very good. I mean, I think the singles were the best songs on this album. As a whole, it's kind of a weaker album, but it's not really that bad. But for Def Leppard, I expect a lot more from this band, because it's one of the bands that I've been listening to. Before is Wolfsbane with Genius. This is a band led by Blaze Bayley. Now, Blaze Bayley, he kind of gets a lot of criticism, with his time in Iron Maiden, but with this band Wolfsbane, it was one of those glam metal bands from the 80s. They were really good. This one, it was not that great. It was more pop punk, kind of cheesy, kind of I don't know, I think they tried to inject some humor into their songs, but it didn't really work for me. There's one song I liked called Zombies, but otherwise it really wasn't that great. I mean, the production was kind of thin. The songs weren't that great. They were just, I think they tried to make a humorous album, but I don't know, they probably could have spent more time on it. And I know this is a band, they haven't released an album in I think over 10 years, but this one just wasn't as good. Number 5 is Motionless in White with Scoring the End of the World. This one, this is probably, out of all the bands, this is the one I know the least out of all of these bands. And I went into this thinking that's going to be pretty cool. And what I thought was, a lot of this sounds like Ice Nine Kills. It sounds like Marilyn Manson. I didn't really find any originality in these songs. A lot of them were very derivative. Just as an album, nothing stood with me. There weren't any songs that stood out. And I think in general, it was just kind of boring and nothing really great about it. At number 6, this is the one that everybody's going to have on their list, but Five Finger Death Punch with Afterlife. Five Finger Death Punch was a band. They started out, they played groove metal. Their first 2 or 3 albums, they were really good. Afterwards, they got very popular. They kind of started, trying to make a more commercial sound. They're trying to fit this image of like these like tough guys, and it just really wasn't really that good. I think Five Finger Death Punch, like their last few albums were probably their weakest. I think this one might be a little better than the two preceding it, which was F8, and I think it was Judgment of None or whatever it was called. The singles were okay, but in general, this album didn't really deliver. I mean, it's the same kind of stuff. Ivan Moody's writing these songs about, I'm going to kick your ass, that kind of stuff. But otherwise, it didn't really do much for me. And I think like Five Finger Death Punch fans didn't even like really try to defend this album as well. At number 7, I have Razor with Cycle of Contempt. Now, this is a Canadian thrash metal band. They released a couple albums like in the late 80s, early 90s, and they were very influential. They released a couple great albums, and they've been absent for a long time. A lot of people are anticipating this album, but it just wasn't that great. The songs were not too memorable. A lot of them sounded the same. A lot of the lyrics were about, similar to what I just said about the Five Finger Death Punch. I'm going to go to the bar, I'm going to kick your ass, look how tough I am. It was just kind of cheesy, really wasn't great, it was kind of lame. But I think this is a band that they have potential to release a really great album. I think if they, got together and worked on another album, there were a lot of like thrash bands, like these like old thrash bands, coming back. Bands like Violence and Zentrix. They released some pretty good albums or EPs this year, but this one just didn't stand up. Drowning Pool with Strike a Nerve. Drowning Pool is one of those bands, they just had very bad luck. I think they had the potential of being like one of like the greatest new metal bands, up there with a band like Slipknot or Korn. But they released their first album, Sinner. That's an awesome album, but unfortunately their singer died. Then they tried to replace him, but I think they never really got it together afterwards. And this is just a band that fell on like unfortunate circumstances. This album, Strike a Nerve, it was okay. Like there wasn't anything special about it. Nothing stood out. None of the singles really, caught my attention. Didn't have really great replay value. I wouldn't say it's a bad album, but it was just one I went into, hoping that, one day this band, they kind of like just find it and they create another great album like Sinner again, but hopefully that happens one day. Now my next one is going to be very controversial. Lorna Shore with The Pain Remains. This is a band, I know they have a lot of rabid fans. A lot of fans love this band, they defend it, but this was just very tedious for me. It was really difficult to get through. It was like over an hour long, and these songs, I couldn't distinguish one from the other. They seemed like very like formulaic. They would have like this symphonic sound, and then like complete silence and the breakdown, and then they would do this like, I can't even do that, but I'm trying to say, it just wasn't for me. I think, I'm not going to say this is a bad album, I'm just saying like this is just like, it's not for me. And I like the EP that they kind of released the year before this, but this one, I think it was just like too much. Maybe if I like listen to like one song and on repeat, maybe I can get into it, but as a whole album, I just couldn't do it. And I have one more. This is probably my biggest disappointment, was Smashing Pumpkins with Autumn Act 1, because Smashing Pumpkins announced they're going to do a sequel to Melancholy and Infinite Sadness. And that's like one of the greatest like albums of the 90s. That's just a classic. So I'm thinking Smashing Pumpkins, they're going to go back to their sound. They're going to do some stuff that sounds like Siamese Dream and have that really cool like guitar tone. And what we get is basically a sequel to their album from 2020 called Seer, which is just electronic music and a throwback to that like 80s type of like Depeche Mode type of sound. It's heavily electronic. There were a few songs that were kind of heavier, but that was all it was. And I did go into this with like some anticipation because they released a single, I think it's called Beguiled, and that one's going to be on Act 2, which comes out in January, which I will review. And I got all like excited for this album. I'm thinking, okay, cool, we're gonna get some really good like old school Smashing Pumpkins. Then I listened to this, and it's just a lot of this, the electronics and the like electronic drums and things like that. And I did a review of this. My comment section blew up. It's one of my like most viewed videos on my channel, and a lot of people are saying the same things. Like they're kind of like wasting the band. They have a really great guitar player. They got a really great drummer, and they're not making use of them because they're using these drum machines and these like electronic sounds. And that's all I'm going to say about this. You can refer to my main video about this and check out the comment section because there's just lots of people saying the same thing, how this album just like was a disappointment. So that is all. Those are just 10 picks for disappointing albums of 2022. If you like that, I made a playlist of my top 50 albums of 2022. It's going to be right there. And on this playlist, I have 5 videos, and it's my top 50 divided into 5 videos, so 10 albums each video. So check that out. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.